At 6:20 on January 24, 1945, First Lieutenant Garland Merl Connor stood inside a shattered farmhouse near Hausen, France, listening to German artillery hammer the frozen earth less than 300 yards away. Connor was 25 years old. He had been in combat for 28 straight months. He wore 4 silver stars. He had been wounded 7 times. The last wound had put him in a hospital bed 3 weeks earlier. He had checked himself out the moment he heard 3rd Battalion was moving toward the Khmer pocket. Now he was back, outside the command post. The ground trembled as artillery rounds walked steadily closer. Connor could hear something worse beneath the explosions, the low, unmistakable rumble of heavy engines. German tanks. Tigers. Mark 6. 6 of them. The Khmer pocket was a jagged German salient west of the Rhine, a last stubborn wedge of resistance that High Command wanted erased before the final push into Germany. It should have fallen weeks ago. Instead, it had turned into a killing ground. Temperatures dropped below 10 degrees every night. Snow lay 3 feet deep in the fields. Frostbite was claiming men almost as fast as bullets. In 10 days, Connor's battalion had lost 83 soldiers, not counting the ones evacuated with frozen hands and blackened toes. The Germans knew this was their last stand. Veterans of the 19th Army were dug in deep, defending every frozen hedgerow with the desperation of men who understood there would be no retreat left after this one. 3rd Battalion's line was stretched dangerously thin. Company K held the left flank, with barely 70 men still combat effective. Another 100 riflemen waited in shallow reserve positions behind them. Farther back, the artillery batteries, the only thing standing between Company K and annihilation, waited for targets they could not see. Fog clung low to the ground. Smoke from burning buildings in Hausen smeared the battlefield into a gray blur. Forward observers couldn't spot German movement. Without eyes on target, the guns were blind. Lieutenant Colonel Lloyd Ramsey stood over a map spread across a scarred wooden table. Red grease pencil marks showed the German assembly areas, guest positions, outdated positions, positions that meant nothing without confirmation. Ramsey needed an observer forward. Way forward. Someone who could see the German infantry forming up. Someone who could spot the Tigers before they rolled straight through Company K's foxholes. He looked up, his eyes locked on Connor. Connor had started the war as a forward artillery observer. He knew fire direction procedures cold. He knew how to walk artillery onto moving armor. And he knew exactly what Ramsey was about to ask. The request wasn't spoken like an order. It didn't need to be. The radios wouldn't reach that far under this much fire. Too much interference. Too much metal in the air. Whoever went forward would have to run a telephone line. 400 yards through an active artillery barrage, straight into the German impact zone. It was close to a death sentence. Connor didn't hesitate. He grabbed a field telephone and an 800-yard spool of wire. Private Robert Doodle stepped forward without being asked and lifted the spool onto his shoulder. 2 men. 1 line. 6 Tiger tanks. At 6:45, Connor stepped out of the farmhouse and into chaos. German shells detonated across the snow-covered fields. Trees exploded into splinters. Shrapnel screamed through the air like angry hornets. Connor ran anyway. Doodle followed, unreeling wire as fast as his frozen hands allowed. Every 15 seconds, a German 105 landed close enough to punch the air from Connor's lungs. Dirt and steel rained down on his helmet. The pressure waves slammed his chest hard enough to stagger him. 300 yards to the American forward line, then another 100 beyond it. That was where Connor needed to be. Somewhere out there, German infantry were forming up. Somewhere behind them, 6 Tigers idled, engines growling, waiting for the order to advance. Connor knew he had minutes, maybe less. In 10 minutes, he would either be calling artillery fire onto the most dangerous targets of his life, or he would be dead in the snow. A German shell detonated 30 yards to Connor's left. The blast lifted him off his feet and slammed him into frozen mud. His helmet rang like a bell. For a moment, all sound vanished, replaced by a high, shrill whine that drowned out everything else. Connor rolled, pushed himself up, and ran. He didn't look back, but he felt the wire tugging behind him, still paying out. That meant Private Doodle was alive, still moving, still following. 200 yards. German artillery was methodical now, walking its fire across the open ground with grim precision. Trees shattered. Branches snapped and scythed through the fog. One oak took a direct hit and disintegrated, splinters blasting horizontally through the smoke like shrapnel. Connor hit the ground, crawled 20 yards, rose, and ran again. At 6:52, he reached Company K's forward line. Riflemen were crouched in their foxholes, heads down, hands white-knuckled around frozen rifles. They weren't firing. They were waiting. Waiting for the artillery to lift. Waiting for the Germans to come. Connor didn't stop. He ran past them, past the last American position, and kept going forward, alone, into no man's land. 100 yards ahead, through the thinning fog, he saw the German line. And behind it, the tanks. 6 Tigers. 56 tons each. Thick frontal armor. Long-barreled 88mm guns capable of killing a Sherman from 2,000 yards. They were lined up, engines idling, infantry forming behind them. Connor spotted a shallow irrigation ditch 30 yards in front of the American line. It was barely 18 inches deep, useless against bullets, marginal against shrapnel. But it gave him what he needed. Line of sight. He dove into the ditch, pressed himself into the frozen earth, set the field telephone beside him, and cranked the handle. The line was good. The battalion command post answered immediately. Connor gave his position without hesitation. He told them what he could see. 6 Tiger tanks, approximately 600 German infantry forming up behind them, range roughly 1,000 yards. The artillery liaison officer came on the line. He asked Connor to confirm his location. 30 yards in front of the American line. In the open, with 600 Germans about to advance straight toward him. Connor confirmed. The liaison officer asked what fire mission he wanted. Connor looked through the fog. The Tigers began to move. Infantry climbed out of cover and started forward, using the tanks as shields. All of them advancing toward Company K, toward 3rd Battalion. Toward him. He gave the order calmly. Battery fire. High explosive. Converged sheaf. Repeat fire at will until ordered to stop. Time to first impact, 90 seconds. Connor pressed himself deeper into the frozen mud. He had a submachine gun with 45 rounds. A field telephone. And less than a minute before the first German infantryman would be close enough to see him. Close enough to throw a grenade. Close enough to end it. At 7 o'clock, the American artillery arrived. Connor heard it first, a distant whistle that grew into a scream, then impact. 6 high-explosive rounds slammed directly into the German assembly area. Through the smoke, Connor saw infantry scatter, diving for cover. One Tiger lurched and stopped. Connor grabbed the telephone, cranked hard. Shift left 50 yards. Repeat. 30 seconds later, another salvo. This time, he saw men go down and not get back up. The fire was working, but the Germans didn't stop. Veteran troops didn't turn back just because artillery was falling. Not when they'd been ordered to break through at any cost. All 6 Tiger engines roared to life. The ground vibrated beneath Connor's body as 56 tons of steel began grinding forward. Infantry surged behind the tanks, using the armor for cover, disciplined, practiced, lethal. American shells bounced uselessly off the Tiger's frontal armor. But every time the infantry shifted position between the tanks, they were exposed. Connor saw it instantly. He called another correction. Right 25 yards. Repeat fire. Connor walked the artillery fire back and forth across the German advance. He wasn't trying to stop them outright. He knew that was impossible. He was trying to slow them, break their momentum, by minutes. Minutes Company K needed to brace for impact. 7:05. The Germans were 400 yards out. Through the thinning fog and drifting smoke, Connor could see their faces now. Young ones. Old ones. Rifles up. Heads down. Moving forward in tight formation. The Tigers spread out exactly as he expected. 2 on the left. 2 in the center. 2 on the right. Textbook armored assault. They would hit the American line in 3 places at once, crush the forward positions, then roll the flanks inward until resistance collapsed. Connor adjusted fire again. Closer. 300 yards now between the shell impacts and his ditch. Company K could hear the rounds screaming overhead, slamming into the Germans, but the advance didn't stop. 7:15. The Germans were 200 yards away. Connor could hear them shouting. Officers barking orders, NCOs driving men forward. Machine guns opened up. Bullets cracked overhead and snapped into the frozen dirt around his position. He pressed himself deeper into the ditch. A tiger fired its main gun. The sound was overwhelming, a concussive thunderclap that punched the air flat. The shell screamed past Connor and detonated behind him, somewhere inside the American lines. They were ranging their fire. In another minute, they'd have the distance dialed in. Then they would systematically erase every American position they could see. Connor cranked the phone. "Battery plus," he said. That meant everything. Every gun in range. Every battery available. The fire direction center confirmed. 12 guns. 4 batteries. All converging on Connor's coordinates. 7:20. The sky came down. This wasn't artillery anymore. It was continuous violence. One long, rolling wall of sound and pressure. High explosive and shrapnel tearing into the German formation. Connor watched men vanish into smoke. Saw equipment hurled into the air. Saw bodies thrown sideways like rag dolls. But the Tigers kept moving. And behind them, the infantry that survived kept coming. 150 yards. Then Connor heard something that froze his blood. Voices. German voices. Not ahead of him. Behind him. They were close. Too close. They had infiltrated around his left flank, slipped between him and the American line. They were moving toward his ditch, hunting the observer who was tearing their attack apart. Connor didn't turn. Didn't look back. If he stopped adjusting fire to deal with them, the Tigers would break through. If he ignored them, he would be dead within a minute. He chose to ignore them. 7:25. The voices were 20 yards behind him now. Boots crunching in frozen snow. Equipment rattling softly. 3 men, maybe 4, moving carefully. Searching. Connor whispered another fire correction into the phone. The main German force was 100 yards out, close enough to see the eagle insignia on their helmets. Machine gun rounds slammed into the ground around his ditch. The voices behind him stopped. They'd heard something. Maybe his whisper. Maybe followed the telephone wire back to him. Connor heard a sharp German command. Then Boots running. He dropped the handset into the crook of his arm and grabbed his submachine gun. 3 Germans appeared at the edge of the ditch, rifles up. They saw him at the same instant he saw them. Connor fired first. Half a magazine at 10 yards. The 45 rounds hit hard and fast. All 3 Germans went down into the snow. But the gunfire echoed. And now everyone knew exactly where he was. German fire from the main advance shifted toward his ditch. Connor grabbed the telephone again, pressed his helmet into the dirt, and kept calling artillery. If he was going to die here, the Tigers were going to die first. Bullets tore into the frozen earth around him. Shrapnel from a near miss shredded the ground 6 feet from Connor's head, slapping dirt and ice into his face. He crawled back to the telephone and called for fire again. Closer. Much closer. The Germans were 75 yards away now. The Tigers 100. Another minute and they'd be on the American line. Another minute and they'd be on top of him. 7:30. A German machine gun found his ditch. The rounds walked methodically across the ground, in front of him, behind him, along the edge of the trench. Frozen dirt erupted in his face. He couldn't lift his head without getting hit. But he didn't need to see anymore. He knew exactly where they were. Connor called for fire. Danger close. That meant artillery landing within 600 yards of friendly troops. The fire direction center hesitated. Asked him to confirm. Connor confirmed. He gave the new coordinates. 50 yards in front of his position. 50 yards from the American line. Right on top of the advancing Germans. The artillery came down like the end of the world. The concussion traveled through the ground and into his bones. His teeth rattled. Frozen mud rained into the ditch. The noise drowned out everything. Even the voice on the other end of the line trying to talk to him. But the Germans kept coming. 50 yards. 40. 30. Connor could see individual men now. Their faces. Their weapons. The strain in their movements as they pushed forward through fire and smoke. A tiger broke through the haze 25 yards in front of his ditch. The massive shape filled his vision. Its main gun traversed slowly left, then right, searching. The commander stood half exposed in the open hatch, binoculars raised, scanning the American line, looking for the man directing the artillery. The binoculars stopped. The officer was looking directly at Connor. The Tiger commander raised his arm and pointed straight at the ditch. The turret began to rotate. Connor knew the timing. 5 seconds to align. 10 seconds to fire. There would be nothing left of him but a crater. Connor grabbed the telephone. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. He gave new coordinates. His own. All batteries. Maximum rate of fire. Blanket this position. The operator on the other end stopped him, asked him to repeat. Those coordinates placed the impact directly on the forward observer. Directly on Connor. Connor repeated the order. Slowly, clearly, then added one instruction. Keep firing until he told them to stop. Even if the line went dead, even if they lost contact. The operator acknowledged. Rounds would arrive in 45 seconds. Good luck, the voice said. Connor dropped the handset. He pressed himself into the bottom of the ditch, pulled his helmet down tight, made himself as small as possible. 45 seconds. The Tiger's gun was almost on him. German infantry were within 20 yards. He could hear boots crunching in frozen snow. Voices shouting. Equipment clattering. Then he heard something else. The whistle. Getting louder. Closer. All 12 guns firing together. Every battery converging on a single point. His point. The world exploded. The ground heaved. The shock slammed him into the mud. The blast crushed the air out of his lungs and drove his vision dark at the edges. Shells detonated 5 yards away. 3 yards away. Right on the edge of his ditch. The Tiger that had been 25 yards in front of him vanished into smoke and fire. German infantry disappeared. The advance simply ceased to exist, erased by a continuous rolling wall of high explosive. But even through the explosions, through the ringing in his ears, Connor could still hear them. German voices. Men screaming. Officers shouting orders. NCOs trying to pull what was left of the assault back together. The attack wasn't over. It had been shattered, not stopped. 7:40. The artillery had been falling on Connor's position for 10 straight minutes. Shrapnel filled the air. And Connor was still alive. The ditch was filling in. Each near miss dumped frozen dirt, shattered ice, and debris into the shallow trench. Connor's uniform was torn. Blood ran down his hands and face. Small cuts, shrapnel nicks, maybe just frozen earth slicing skin raw. He couldn't tell anymore. He picked up the telephone. It still worked. Connor gave new coordinates, shifted the fire 25 yards forward, walking the barrage onto the next wave of Germans struggling through smoke and drifting snow. The enemy had gone to ground. He could see shapes moving in the haze. Men crawling, running bent low, dragging wounded back behind shell holes. They weren't retreating. They were regrouping. Another Tiger emerged from the smoke. A different tank. This one had survived the barrage. One track damaged, grinding forward unevenly, slow but relentless. The gun still traversed. Still lethal. 7:50. Connor had been in the ditch for over an hour. The Germans had been attacking for over an hour. Neither side was quitting. Connor cranked the phone and called for fire again. Same coordinates. His own position. The Fire Direction Center asked if he was certain. Connor said he was. Shells came down. Germans went down with them, but the survivors kept coming. 8 o'clock. 2 hours since Connor had left the command post. By now, the German attack should have broken through. Company K should have been overrun. 3rd Battalion's left flank should have collapsed. It hadn't. Because one man in a shallow ditch kept calling artillery onto the ground the Germans needed to cross. The cost was visible. Through the smoke, Connor could see bodies, dozens of them, maybe more. The artillery was devastating, but 600 men don't stop because the first 100 die. The telephone line snapped twice. Both times, Connor crawled out under fire, followed the wire through shell craters, found the break, and spliced it back together with numb, shaking fingers. Then he crawled back into the ditch and kept calling fire. 8:15. German infantry reached 15 yards. They moved crater to crater, using the destruction for cover, closing in. Connor called fire directly onto them. The shells landed so close that shrapnel sliced through his jacket. The Germans died. Another group came in from the right. They had figured it out. They knew the forward observer in that ditch was the only thing stopping them. Kill him, and the artillery would stop. Kill him, and the Tigers would break through. 8:30, 10 yards. Connor could hear them talking, low, urgent voices. He could hear them planning. They were going to rush him. He picked up his submachine gun and checked the magazine. 20 rounds. 15 Germans. The math didn't work. Connor dropped the gun and grabbed the telephone. Called for fire. On his own position. For the 3rd time. The Fire Direction Center didn't question it. They acknowledged and sent the shells. The barrage slammed down. Connor felt heat wash over the ditch. Felt pressure crush the air out of his lungs. Felt fragments of bodies hit the frozen ground around him. When the smoke cleared, the Germans who'd been 10 yards away were gone. But the attack wasn't. More infantry moved forward. The Tigers kept advancing. The Germans had committed. They would break through or die trying. Most were dying. They weren't stopping. 8:45. A German soldier appeared at the edge of the ditch, 5 yards. Close enough that Connor could see the kid's face. He couldn't have been 20. Fear in his eyes. The rifle coming up. Connor shot him point blank. The soldier fell backward into the snow. 2 more appeared. Connor shot them both. The gun clicked empty. Connor dropped it. Picked up the telephone. Called for fire again. The men 5 yards away had been scouts. Behind them were more. Always more. The artillery came down. The ditch filled with fragments, frozen earth, debris. Connor lay in 3 inches of ice, mud, and blood. His blood. German blood. It no longer mattered. 9 o'clock. 3 hours since Connor had run forward with the wire. Company K was still holding. 3rd Battalion's line was intact. The German attack was stalling, breaking apart, losing momentum. And Connor was still alive. They weren't retreating. Not yet. The Tigers were still moving, slow, methodical, grinding forward through smoke and shattered ground. And the German infantry was still trying to kill the American forward observer who refused to die. Connor cranked the telephone and asked the question he'd been avoiding. How much ammunition was left? The Fire Direction Center answered honestly. Maybe 20 minutes of sustained fire. Maybe. Connor looked out through the smoke at the advancing Germans. 20 minutes might be enough. Or it might not. 9:15. Connor heard the change before he saw it. The German voices were different now. Not commands. Not shouted encouragement. Arguments. Officers arguing with NCOs. NCOs arguing with enlisted men. Men pointing at the dead, at the craters, at the artillery still falling around them. The attack wasn't breaking from fear. It was breaking from math. Too many dead. Not enough men left to finish the job. One Tiger tried anyway. It came straight forward, toward the American line, toward Connor's ditch. The tank was buttoned up now. No commander visible. Just 56 tons of steel pushing through wreckage and bodies. Connor called fire. Not on his own position. 20 yards forward. Directly into the Tiger's path. The shells came down. The Tiger kept moving. The rounds didn't penetrate the frontal armor, but the crew couldn't see. Smoke and explosions blinded them. The tank rolled into a crater and stopped hard. Track buried in frozen mud. The engine screamed. The crew tried to reverse. Tried to rock free. The tank didn't move. Connor shifted fire again. Everything concentrated on the immobilized Tiger. Shells hammered around it. Not killing it, but trapping it. Keeping the crew buttoned up. After 10 minutes, the engine went silent. Connor couldn't tell if it was damaged, out of fuel, or simply abandoned. 9:30. The German infantry began pulling back. Not a rout. A controlled withdrawal. Officers still had discipline. Men carried wounded. Dead were left where they fell. The Tigers that could move reversed slowly, backing away from the American line. The attack was over. Connor stayed in the ditch. Kept the phone to his ear. Watched. He'd seen false withdrawals before. He waited for the second wave. It didn't come. By 9:45, the firing had faded to isolated shots. Nervous riflemen in Company K firing at shadows in drifting smoke. Connor tried to stand. His legs failed. 3 hours in frozen mud had taken everything. He couldn't feel his hands. Couldn't feel his feet. His body shook uncontrollably. Not fear, cold and exhaustion and shock. He cranked the telephone. Told the Fire Direction Center the attack had been stopped. Said he was coming back. Tried to stand again. Collapsed into the ditch. 15 minutes later, American soldiers reached him. Lieutenant Harold Wigetman and a squad from Company K. They waited until they were certain the Germans weren't returning. Then they moved forward to find the man who had held the line. They found Connor in the ditch, covered in frozen mud and blood, the telephone still clutched in his hand, the wire running 400 yards back to the command post. Alive. Somehow. They pulled him out and carried him back. Connor kept asking the same question. Did Company K hold? Did 3rd Battalion hold? They told him yes. Everyone held. Behind them, across 400 yards of frozen ground, German bodies lay scattered in the smoke. At least 50. Probably more. The counterattack had failed, and one man with a telephone had stopped it. Over 100 German wounded. 6 Tiger tanks, 3 destroyed, 2 damaged, 1 abandoned. and one American lieutenant in a frozen ditch for 3 hours with a telephone. They carried Connor back to the battalion aid station. Medics cut away his uniform. It came off in pieces. They found shrapnel wounds, cuts from frozen debris driven into his skin by blast pressure, frostbite in his hands and feet, exhaustion so deep he couldn't stand without help. But nothing fatal, nothing serious enough to send him home. On February 10, 1945, 16 days after the battle at Hausen, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch presented First Lieutenant Garland Merl Connor with the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for valor in the United States Army. Patch told him the truth. It should have been the Medal of Honor. Connor's battalion commander had recommended it, but the paperwork hadn't moved fast enough. Connor was already shipping to a new assignment. Regulations closed the door. The DSC would have to stand. Connor didn't argue. Company K had held. 3rd Battalion had survived. That was enough. He stayed in combat until June. Fought across the Rhine into Germany. Took part in 4 more major operations. Was wounded again. By the end of the war, Connor had spent 28 consecutive months in combat. He'd earned 4 Silver Stars, 4 Bronze Stars, 7 Purple Hearts, 1 Distinguished Service Cross, and a battlefield commission from sergeant to first lieutenant. He came home to Kentucky on June 22, 1945. The town of Albany threw him a parade. That's where Pauline Wells first saw him, 23 years old, watching a quiet soldier ride through town in the back of a car, wearing more medals than she'd ever seen on one man. She didn't believe the stories people told her. Didn't believe this small, soft-spoken man had done what they said he'd done. They were married a week later. They stayed married for 53 years. Raised 1 son. Ran a 36-acre farm. Connor never talked about the war. He told people he'd left those memories across the Atlantic. He told Pauline he wanted to forget. He died on November 5, 1998, at 79 years old. Kidney failure. Diabetes. His medals sat in a cardboard box in the back of a closet. 2 years before his death, a veteran named Richard Chilton contacted the family. Chilton had been researching his uncle, who had served with Connor at Anzio. He asked to see Connor's records. What he found changed everything. The Distinguished Service Cross citation. The original recommendation for the Medal of Honor. Witness statements from officers who had been there at Hausen. Chilton began a campaign. Pauline joined him. Then historians. Then Kentucky lawmakers. Then national veterans organizations. For 22 years, they fought the Army bureaucracy. Fought regulations that said Medal of Honor recommendations had to be submitted within 3 years. Fought a federal court ruling that denied the request in 2014. They kept going. Kept submitting evidence. Kept telling Connor's story. On March 29, 2018, the White House announced that President Donald Trump would award the Medal of Honor to First Lieutenant Garland Merl Connor. On June 26, 2018, 73 years and 5 months after Connor spent 3 hours in a frozen ditch calling artillery fire onto his own position, his widow accepted the medal. Pauline Connor was 89 years old. Their son Paul stood beside her. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the East Room. The citation was read aloud. At last, the Army acknowledged what one man had done in January 1945. History had remembered.